When the HOA sent me a letter saying my driveway was encroaching on community property, I almost laughed. They didn't know I'd been the official county surveyor for over 20 years, and that I had access to every legal map, measurement, and boundary line in this neighborhood. What they tried next made me stop laughing. I remember the morning it began, as clearly as if it happened yesterday, though it's been 3 years now since the whole ordeal started. It was early spring, March 15th, to be exact, the kind of day when the air still carries that sharp winter chill that makes you pull your jacket tighter, but the sunlight already feels warmer on your skin, promising the arrival of better days ahead. The kind of morning that usually put me in a good mood. I was in my garage, a cluttered but organized space that served as both workshop and storage for my surveying business. Dust motes danced in the slanted sunbeams as I sorted through some old equipment I hadn't touched in years, an ancient theodolite from my early career, coils of measuring chain that had been replaced by GPS units, field books filled with measurements from subdivisions that were now decades old. My wife, Sarah, always joked that I was a pack rat when it came to surveying gear, but in my line of work, you never knew when an old piece of equipment might tell a story that modern tools couldn't. That's when Sarah stepped outside, her bare feet making soft sounds on the concrete. She was still in her robe, coffee mug in one hand, but it was what she held in her other hand that caught my attention. A letter, and she didn't have to say a word. After 22 years of marriage, I could read the expression on her face, like a topographical map. That particular mix of annoyance and disbelief. The look she got when the neighbors let their dog bark all night, or when the grocery store ran out of her favorite yogurt. She just handed it to me silently, shaking her head. The envelope bore the familiar logo of our homeowners association, a stylized drawing of a house with a tree beside it that had always struck me as vaguely menacing. The return address was printed in that formal sans serif font that bureaucrats love, the kind that makes even a birthday invitation look like a legal summons. Now, I should give you some context here. I've lived in Meadowbrook Estates for almost 15 years. It's a quiet, middle-class suburban development built in the late 1990s. The kind of place with neatly trimmed lawns that look like green carpets, matching mailboxes that were mandatory, according to the CC&Rs, and just enough rules to make sure things stayed presentable, whatever that meant. The houses are mostly two-story colonials and split levels, painted in approved earth tones, with the occasional contemporary thrown in for variety. I've had my share of small disagreements with the HOA over the years, nothing major. Just the usual petty stuff. There was the great fence paint debate of 2019, when they claimed my colonial sage was too close to forest green and violated the color palette restrictions. Then there was the hedge trimming citation because my boxwoods had grown 6 inches above the prescribed height limit. And who could forget the infamous boat trailer incident? When they tried to tell me I couldn't park it in my own driveway during the off-season, despite the fact that my garage wasn't deep enough to accommodate it. But nothing absolutely. Nothing prepared me for what I was about to read. I tore open the envelope with my thumb, unfolded the single sheet of official HOA letterhead, and began reading. The words seemed to swim on the page at first, as if my brain was rejecting what my eyes were seeing. Dear Mr. Faison Khan, it has come to the attention of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association Board of Directors that your residential driveway is currently encroaching on community property by exactly 3.5 feet along the eastern border of your lot 47, Block C, Meadowbrook Estates, subdivision. This encroachment represents a violation of both your property deed restrictions and county zoning ordinance 12.47. As such, you have 30 days from the date of this notice to remove the offending portion of said driveway and restore the encroached area to its natural state. Failure to remedy this violation within the specified timeframe will result in the board taking necessary action to remedy the encroachment at the property owner's expense. All costs associated with removal and restoration will be added to your HOA account and, if unpaid, may result in a lien being placed against your property. We trust you will address this matter promptly to avoid further action. Sincerely, Charles. Chuck Morrison, HOA, Board President, Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. At first, I laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was so monumentally, spectacularly absurd. Sarah looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "What's so amusing about an HOA violation?" she asked, though she was already walking back toward the house, probably assuming it was just another trivial complaint. "Honey," I said, still chuckling, "you're not going to believe this. You see, I'm not just any homeowner who might panic at receiving such a letter. I'm a licensed county surveyor, have been for over 2 decades. I've worked on every major subdivision in Hamilton County. I know every plat, every boundary line, every easement, every setback requirement, like they were members of my own family. My office walls are covered with certificates and awards from the State Surveying Board. And my filing cabinets contain thousands of property surveys dating back to when I first got my license. And here's the kicker that made the whole situation so deliciously ironic. I had worked on the original survey for Meadowbrook Estates back in 1998. I literally had the signed and sealed plans in my filing cabinet, gathering dust just 20 feet from where I was standing. My driveway was exactly where it was supposed to be, positioned according to the setback requirements I had calculated myself, approved by the county engineer, and built by contractors who had followed my survey stakes to the inch. But as I read the letter again, my smile slowly faded, because I knew how the HOA operated in this neighborhood. I'd watched them over the years, observed their tactics. This wasn't really about property lines or county ordinances. This was about control. They were testing me, probably hoping I'd just roll over and comply to avoid trouble, the way most homeowners did when faced with official-sounding letters and threats of liens. Chuck Morrison had been the HOA president for 6 years, ever since he'd retired from his job as a middle manager at the insurance company downtown. Being HOA president seemed to give him the sense of authority and importance that his corporate career apparently hadn't provided. He was the type who called special meetings to discuss whether the community garden could include tomatoes too. Messy, when they rot, and sent violation notices to people whose holiday decorations stayed up 3 days past the prescribed date. I went back inside, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee from the pot Sarah always kept warming, and sat down at my desk in the home office. The room was lined with metal filing cabinets, each drawer meticulously labeled and organized. I pulled out the thick folder marked Meadowbrook Estates, Original Survey 1998, and spread the contents across my desk. There it was, a large sheet of architectural paper, 24 by 36 inches, covered in precise lines, measurements, and notations. Every lot was outlined and numbered. Every street was named and dimensioned. Every utility easement was marked and measured. And there, in the lower right corner, were the official stamps and signatures, the county engineer's seal, the developer's signature, and my own professional seal, with my license number, a guarantee that every measurement on that plat was accurate and legally binding. I traced my finger along the lines until I found Lot 47, Block C, my lot. The eastern property line was clearly marked, running exactly 85 feet from the front property line to the back. My driveway, as shown on the original site plan, sat a full 8 feet from that property line, well within the required 5-foot setback for driveways. That afternoon, I decided to call Chuck directly. I figured a professional conversation might clear up what was obviously some kind of mistake. His number was in the neighborhood directory, right there under Board of Directors. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Morrison, residence," Chuck speaking. He had that particular tone of voice that made everything sound like a lecture, even when he was just answering the phone. "Hi, Chuck. This is Faison Khan from Maple Street. I got your letter today about my driveway, and I think there's been some kind of mistake. Oh, hello, Faison. I could hear him settling into what I imagined was his favorite chair, the one from which he probably wrote all his violation notices. What kind of mistake? Well, the letter claims my driveway is encroaching on community property by 3.5 feet, but that's not possible. My driveway is fully on my property, well within the setback requirements. I know this because I'm a county surveyor, and I actually did the original plat for this neighborhood back in '98. There was a long pause on the line. I could hear him breathing, probably processing this information. Then he chuckled, not a friendly chuckle, but the kind that suggested he thought I was trying to pull something over on him. Well, Faison, he said, drawing out my name like it was foreign to him, even though he'd lived across the street from me for 6 years. That's very interesting, but you see, we have our own independent survey that says otherwise. Professional survey, done by a licensed company, and the board has already reviewed the findings and voted. You have 30 days. Chuck, I'd be happy to look at that survey. Can you send me a copy? As a professional courtesy, I might be able to help clarify any discrepancies. I'm afraid that won't be possible, he said, his voice taking on that bureaucratic tone that people use when they're enjoying having power over someone else. The survey is board property and not for distribution to individual homeowners. But I assure you it's very thorough and very accurate. Well, can you at least tell me who conducted the survey? I know all the licensed surveyors in the county. Maybe I could contact them directly. That information is also confidential. Board business, you understand. That was my first real red flag. Any legitimate survey would be public record once filed with the county. The surveyor's name and license number would be on the document. There was no reason to keep that information confidential unless, Chuck, I said, keeping my voice level and professional. You do understand that any survey claiming to show property boundaries would need to be filed with the county to have any legal standing, right? The board's position is clear, phase 30 days. And with that, he hung up. Over the next week, I started noticing things. Small things that probably would have escaped the attention of most people. But when you've spent 20 years walking property lines and observing details, for a living, you develop a certain awareness of your surroundings. First was the strange pickup truck, a faded blue Ford F-150, with a dented tailgate that started appearing across the street from my house. Different times of day, different durations, but always parked in the same spot, with a clear view of my driveway. The driver was always different, but they all had the same behavior pattern, sitting in the cab, occasionally looking at paperwork, sometimes talking on their phones. Then there was the man with the camera. I first noticed him on a Thursday morning, as I was leaving for work. He was standing on the sidewalk in front of the Hendersons' house, 3 lots down from mine, with what looked like a professional-grade digital camera with a long lens. He was taking photos of my driveway from different angles, making notes on a small pad between shots. When I walked over to introduce myself and ask what he was doing, he quickly packed up his equipment and got into a white sedan that had been parked around the corner. By the time I reached the street, he was already driving away. The HOA board members, all 5 of them, started walking past my property more often than usual. They'd stroll by in groups of 2 or 3, clipboards in hand, stopping to point at various aspects of my landscaping and making notes. Chuck himself made several passes, sometimes with his wife Carol, who served as the HOA secretary. They'd stand at the edge of my property line, having conversations just loud enough for me to hear snippets about property values and setting precedents. Sarah noticed it too. "It's like living in a fishbowl," she said one evening as we watched. 2 board members measure the distance from our mailbox to the curb. What exactly are they hoping to accomplish? That was a good question, and I was beginning to form some theories. About 10 days after receiving the original letter, I came home from work to find something that made my blood pressure spike immediately. Orange spray paint lines had appeared on my driveway overnight, the kind contractors use to mark cuts before demolition. Someone had drawn a line exactly 3.5 feet from my eastern property line, running the entire width of the driveway. Taped to my front door was another letter from the HOA. Dear Mr. Khan, as you have failed to respond to our previous correspondence regarding the encroachment violation on your property, please be advised that Precision Concrete Services has been contracted to remove the offending portion of your driveway, beginning Monday, March 29th, at 8 a.m. All costs associated with this remediation will be charged to your HOA account. We strongly encourage you to remove any vehicles or personal property from the affected area before work begins. This action is necessary to maintain community standards and property values. Sincerely, the Board of Directors, Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. That's when I stopped playing defense and started playing offense. The first thing I did the next morning was call the county zoning office. I spoke with Linda Martinez, who'd been the zoning administrator for as long as I'd been a surveyor. Linda and I had worked together on hundreds of projects over the years. She knew my reputation and trusted my work. She said, when she heard my voice, "It's been too long. What can I do for you?" I explained the situation, reading her the letters word for word. There was silence on the other end of the line, then a sound that might have been choking. "Are you serious?" she finally managed. "They're threatening to demolish part of your driveway without a permit." "That's what the letter says. Have they pulled any demolition permits for my address?" I could hear her typing on her computer. "Let me check. ... No, nothing. Not only have they not applied for a demolition permit, but any work on private property would require the owner's written consent, engineering drawings, and environmental clearance. If they touch that driveway without permits, they're violating ... double quotes. She paused, presumably counting at least 6 different county ordinances. What would happen if they went ahead anyway? Well, first I'd shut down the job site immediately and cite everyone involved. The contractor would face fines and possible license suspension, and whoever authorized the work could face criminal charges for property damage. Can you put that in writing? Absolutely. I'll email you a cease and desist order within the hour. Next, I decided to investigate this mysterious independent survey the HOA kept mentioning. A quick search through the county's public records database showed that no new surveys had been filed for any property in Meadowbrook Estates in over 3 years, which meant the HOA either had no survey at all, or they had one that was so flawed it couldn't be filed officially. I spent the next 3 days building an airtight case. Using my GPS equipment, I took precise measurements of every boundary marker on my property and documented everything with high-resolution photos and video. The markers, concrete monuments set during the original subdivision, were exactly where my 1998 survey showed they should be. My driveway was a full 8.2 feet from the eastern property line, not encroaching by even a fraction of an inch. I dug through my old files and found emails from when the neighborhood was first being developed, including correspondence with the original developers confirming that all driveways had been positioned according to my survey specifications. I even tracked down 2 of the original concrete contractors who had worked on the neighborhood and got notarized statements confirming that they had followed my survey stakes when pouring the driveways. But the most damning piece of evidence was something I discovered while reviewing the HOA's own records, which were public documents available at the county courthouse. The minutes from the board meeting where they supposedly voted to pursue this issue showed that only 3 of the 5 board members were present, and there was no mention of any survey or property dispute. According to their own bylaws, major expenditures required a full board vote with written documentation. They were making it up as they went along. Tuesday morning, March 29th, arrived gray and overcast, with the kind of drizzle that makes everything look dreary. I was ready. At exactly 7:45 a.m., A flatbed truck rumbled down Maple Street, carrying a small skid-steer loader and a concrete saw. 3 men in work boots and high-vis vests got out and started unloading equipment. I could see Chuck Morrison watching from his front window across the street. I walked outside wearing my official county surveyor badge on a lanyard around my neck, carrying a folder of documents and my camera. "Morning, gentlemen," I said pleasantly. "Beautiful day for concrete work." The oldest of the 3, probably the foreman, looked up from the saw he was unloading. "Yeah, supposed to clear up later. You the homeowner?" "I am." "Can I see your demolition permit?" They looked at each other with the kind of confusion that told me everything I needed to know. The foreman straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. We were told by the HOA to come out and cut back this driveway. They said it was all approved." I nodded sympathetically. "And do you have that instruction in writing, along with the county permit for demolition work on private property?" The foreman's expression changed as he realized they might have walked into something. "Well, we got the work order from the HOA, but no permit from Hamilton County zoning." "No, sir. The HOA said they'd handle all that." I handed him a printed copy of the county ordinance regarding unlawful property damage, along with the cease and desist order Linda had prepared. "Gentlemen, I am a sworn officer of Hamilton County in my capacity as a licensed surveyor. Any attempt to damage this driveway without proper permits would constitute criminal property damage. I'd be obligated to file an official complaint with the sheriff's department." The foreman read the documents, showed them to his crew, and looked back at me. "You mind if I make a phone call?" "Not at all. Take your time." I watched him call what was presumably the concrete company's main office, explaining the situation in hushed tones. The conversation lasted about 5 minutes. When he hung up, he walked back over to me. "Sir, we're going to pack up and leave. Our company can't risk working without proper permits. You'll need to take this up with whoever hired us." They had their equipment loaded and were driving away within 15 minutes. Chuck Morrison had disappeared from his window. That evening, I sent an email to the entire HOA board, with copies to the county attorney and the local newspaper's investigative reporter. To the Meadowbrook Estates HOA Board of Directors. "This morning, your contracted demolition crew attempted to damage my property without proper permits, legal authority, or factual basis. They were turned away by county officials after being informed that such actions would constitute criminal property damage. Your claims regarding my driveway encroaching on community property are categorically false. Attached you will find 1. The original 1998 survey plat, showing my driveway's approved location. 2. Current GPS measurements confirming the driveway's position. 3. Notarized statements from the original contractors. 4. County records showing no survey supporting your claims. 5. Documentation that your vote to pursue this matter violated your own bylaws. Any further attempts to damage my property will result in immediate legal action for harassment, trespassing, and abuse of fiduciary duty. I am also formally requesting an accounting of HOA funds spent on this frivolous matter. The facts are clear, the law is unambiguous, and my patience is exhausted. Respectfully, Faizan Khan, PLS Licensed County Surveyor number 4782. The silence from the HOA was deafening. No acknowledgement, no response, no defensive explanations. Just ... nothing. 2 days later, I received a brief email from Chuck Morrison. The board has decided to drop the matter. Consider it closed. No apology, no admission of fault, no explanation of how they'd made such a massive error. Just a retreat, probably hoping the whole embarrassing episode would be quickly forgotten. But I wasn't quite finished. See, during my investigation, I'd discovered something interesting about the HOA's finances. They had spent nearly $4,000 from the community fund on this nonsense money for the supposed survey, legal consultation, and the demolition crew, all without the required Membership vote for expenditures over $500. That was a clear violation of their own bylaws and potentially their fiduciary duty to the community. I brought this up at the next monthly HOA meeting, held in the community center on a Thursday evening in April. The room was packed. Word had apparently gotten around about the driveway incident, and people were curious to hear what had really happened. When the floor was opened for homeowner comments, I stood up with my folder of documents. I'd like to address the recent attempt by this board to demolish part of my driveway based on false claims of property encroachment, I began. The room went completely quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. I laid out the facts methodically. The lack of any legitimate survey, the absence of required permits, the violation of county ordinances, and the waste of community funds. I passed around copies of the original survey plat so neighbors could see for themselves that my driveway was exactly where it belonged. The looks on the board members' faces were priceless, a mixture of embarrassment, anger, and defeat. Chuck Morrison kept trying to interrupt with procedural objections, but the assembled homeowners were having none of it. They wanted answers. "So let me get this straight," said Mrs. Patterson from Oak Avenue. "You spent $4,000 of our money to harass a neighbor over a property dispute that never existed." When Chuck tried to mumble something about protecting community interests, Mr. Garcia from Elm Street cut him off. "Community interests? You mean like making sure our HOA doesn't get sued for harassment and property damage?" Within a month, Chuck Morrison resigned as HOA president, citing health concerns and a desire to focus on family. 2 other board members followed suit. The spring elections brought in a completely new leadership team, most of whom ran on platforms of transparency and fiscal responsibility. One of their first acts was to institute a new policy requiring full membership approval for any expenditure over $500, along with detailed financial reporting at every meeting. They also established a formal appeals process for violation notices, ensuring that homeowners would have due process before facing penalties. The new board issued a formal apology to me and Sarah, along with a commitment that community funds would be managed more carefully in the future. They even asked if I'd be willing to serve as a consulting surveyor for any future property disputes, which I politely declined, and my driveway, still right where it's always been. Solid concrete, perfectly positioned, exactly 8.2 feet from my eastern property line. Every morning when I back out to go to work, I see those faded orange spray paint marks there, still faintly visible despite my efforts to remove them, and I'm reminded of an important lesson. In my 20-plus years as a surveyor, I've learned that the most important measurements aren't always the ones you make with instruments. Sometimes the most crucial measurement is of your own willingness to stand up to bullies who count on people being too intimidated or too tired to fight back. Measurements don't lie, and when you stand your ground, literally and figuratively, tyrants tend to back down remarkably quickly. Sometimes all it takes is showing them that you know exactly where you stand, and you're not moving an inch. Asterisk, asterisk,